I think he's going to lose on that one because the Constitution is quite clear that there is birthright citizenship, and he can't change that by executive order.
Now, executive orders are arguably the US president's most powerful tool for enacting change, as they've come from the same, as they have the same force behind them as legislation and bypass both houses of Congress. President Trump has wasted no time in setting out his plans. So far, he's declared an emergency at the southern US border, along with several other immigration-related policies. That's only a few of them, of course. We'll be discussing his plans on border control in detail in the next half an hour or so on the programme. We've got a debate lined up for you on that one. Other notable orders that he's already signed include America withdrawing from the 2015 Paris Agreement, as well as an order to have the US exit from the World Health Organization. Let's talk about those and more with Suzannah Sherry, who is Professor Emeritus of Law at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. A warm welcome, Suzannah.
Thank you.
So we'll touch on the border with our later guests. I'm sure you've been looking at that as well, about whether calling an emergency, a national emergency on the border is legally sound or not. But for now, let's just dig into a couple of these other areas that, perhaps could be subject to challenge. He wants to remove the USA from the Paris Agreement again. Could there be any challenge to that? I guess other nations involved in that will have to learn to work with him or will work without him more roundly.
I think so. I mean, what he's done so far is he's ordered the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations to submit formal written notice that of the withdrawal, and that he says will be effective immediately. And I don't think there's much in the there's not anybody in the United States who can stop that. He is the head of the executive department, which means he is the head of the foreign relations, and he can withdraw from a treaty. Now, I suppose there might be an international court that could say that a country is not allowed to withdraw, but there's nothing in the United States that can stop him from that one.
And what about exiting the World Health Organization?
It's very similar. There is no reason why the United States was required to join it, and he has ordered that notice be given that we're withdrawing from it. He says basically, both of these things illustrate that he is an isolationist. He doesn't trust other nations. He doesn't really want to be involved in treaties with other nations. He's also, I think, something of a climate change denier. He revoked several of Biden's climate change executive orders, as well as trying to withdraw from the Paris Agreement.
Yeah, he's opening the Alaska wilderness to more oil and gas drilling. Is going to halt the leasing of federal waters for offshore wind farms. I mean, leaving the Paris Agreement definitely isn't just it. As you said, attempt to reverse Joe Biden's ban on offshore drilling for 625 million acres of federal waters. So it's all in there. What about the order to recognise just two sexes, male and female? Presumably this will contradict other legislation that exists. Certainly guidelines surrounding transgender people, transgender rights, etc.
Well, the guidelines is essentially what he's changing. That is, there are laws that prohibit private employers, institutions receiving federal funds, and the federal government itself from discriminating on the basis of sex. So then the question is limiting is declaring that there are only two sexes, is that discrimination on the basis of sex? Ultimately, a court might have to decide that. But basically, he is the head of the executive branch. And what he has said in this particular executive order is, here are the definitions of male and female, and these definitions will, and I quote here, govern all executive interpretations and application of federal law and administrative policy. In other words, as head of the executive department, he is telling the executive department how to define sex. And unless that conflicts with a law that's already been enacted by Congress, or could be in the future, or it conflicts with a Supreme Court interpretation of the Constitution, he can do that.
Just dig into us further with an explanation on the constitutional process and why presidents have this power. I note that for some of these, in executing some of these executive orders, he would directly either sort of butt heads with or cause issues with what's in the Constitution.
Well, a few of them might. So basically, a president has three sources for executive orders. The first one is that he is head of the executive department, right? We have three branches of government. One of them is the executive branch, which is huge. It's all of the agencies. It's the IRS. It's the Department of Justice. It's the State Department. It's the Homeland Security. It's all of that, and he is the head of it, and he can tell his underlings essentially what to do. So that's the major source of his power, and it, I think, accounts for not all, but many of the executive orders that he's already issued. Now, those can be blocked by a court if one of them violates the Constitution. I've looked at them. I think the only one that probably violates the Constitution is his attempt to nullify birthright citizenship, right, because that's in the Constitution. So I doubt.
Hence the legal challenge from several US states today. They're threatening to sue him over it, aren't they? Several Democrat states.
Yes, and as well as I think the ACLU, and I think he's going to lose on that one because the Constitution is quite clear that there is birthright citizenship, and he can't change that by executive order. His orders as head of the executive branch can also be overridden by Congress. Congress could pass a law saying no, transgender individuals are protected by existing law, but then he's going to veto that. So that's not likely. Now, Congress, with some of them, Congress could impose impediments. They could, for example, refuse to fund some of his pet projects.
Okay.
The second source, that's the first source. The second source is particularly on immigration. Congress has passed laws in the past that are still on the books that give the president the authority to act, in particular to suspend or restrict entry to the United States if entry would be detrimental to the interests of the United States. Again, Congress could repeal that, but the repealer would be vetoed. There, the courts have a little more power because they can undo what he's done, not only if it's unconstitutional, but also if it exceeds the powers that are granted by the relevant statute. And you talked a little bit about the emergency at the southern border. Trump has declared that it's an invasion of the United States, and that gives him all kinds of powers. And so a court could decide that, no, that interpretation of the statute is wrong. And then finally, he does have some constitutional authority. He certainly is the commander-in-chief of the military, so he can order the military down to defend the southern border. And he has claimed in some of these executive orders other inherent constitutional powers, and all of that is essentially for a court to decide ultimately.
Out of these 100 executive orders, I mean, this is sort of hard to give a sweeping statement on, I know, but how many of those do you think are going to get through? How many will be subject to legal challenge, and ultimately how many will Trump be left with?
Well, almost all of them will be subject to legal challenge. That's just the way it works here in the United States.
And so it could take some time, because we heard from Trump's border czar today that immigration raids are already starting today. So none of this can really be enacted until any challenge is bypassed or has been met with a response.
Well, that depends. I mean, so if once a suit is filed, the first thing that the challengers are going to do is to ask the court for a temporary injunction. That is, to temporarily block the government from doing what Trump wants them to do. And a court might or might not issue that order. If it doesn't, then the government can go forward implementing his orders. But some of them probably won't be blocked. Some of them might be temporarily blocked. I think, unfortunately, that most of them are going to survive the challenge. Like I said, the birthright citizenship almost certainly won't survive a challenge. I think that one is going to be struck down. And some of the immigration, the border issues might not survive. But I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, look, it's been really lovely to speak to you and just get a more comprehensive understanding of really where these executive orders, done to great sort of pomp and showmanship, many of them signed in that Capital One arena last night by Donald Trump, what the fate of them will be. It's really interesting to look into. Suzannah Sherry, thank you, Professor Emeritus of Law at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. Thank you.